All right. Well, we're live.
In front of all these people.
We'd like to welcome you back to Trampled Underfoot Podcast.com. So, it's a funny thing because years and years ago, I bought my first computer and brought it home. My first, for me, computer, and brought it home and set it up. And it was evening, and I was working in the Everglades at that time. And I set the computer up. I bought the monitor. It was like a tiny monitor and the computer and the whole thing. And I turned on the internet I had it all ready to turn on the internet, and it opened up. And then I began my exploring. And as I began exploring, eventually in that time, I ran across the lizard people. And there was a plethora of information.
Mm-hmm.
And it was super intriguing. I've told you in the past that growing up, my grandfather used to love sort of like expanding my personal horizons by telling me stories of adventure and stuff, more to do with like Indiana Jones and catacomb exploration and such, which he did as a child, actually, with his uncle, because that was his job, his uncle's job, or one of his jobs. He would do that. And so I've always loved the adventure side of things, but it's quite the line from entertainment to believing something and becoming a follower of said
theory.
Yeah. But you, at that point, you wouldn't call it a theory. At that point, that's you're warring to save mankind, as you know. So I don't know how much you've heard of the lizard people.
Just a little bit peripherally, here and there.
A couple of things about it, and I wanted to do a little something on this because it's very much ingrained in popular culture, albeit in a sort of like undertow type of fashion. But for those people that enjoy conspiracy theories, it's one of those that are up there. So it's a very American thing to be suspicious of forces that are capable of, doing you harm. Governments, and you hear about militias, and you hear about all these things. And back in the day, I used to, when I'd go to church, there were bookstores, church bookstores, and you'd go, and I picked up a book, and they had a book on the New World Order.
Mm-hmm.
And churches, especially in the early days, had a sort of, ear, and look out for problems where government would over infringe and stuff, the Protestant movement and, the Millerites and all that. There's a whole history. So there's a whole cultural thing that developed from that. And people, they acquire these belief systems without knowing that they're acquiring them and their origins and whatnot. But do you remember Art Bell?
Oh, yeah. Remember him well. He was only a couple 100 miles to the south of us when we lived in Nevada, down in a little bitty town nobody's ever heard of called Pahrump. In fact, I listened to his first few broadcasts. We were stationed over in Hawaii when he was syndicated and went coast to coast on Coast to Coast AM.
Mm-hmm.
And that happened at a time where I was working for a temp agency, and the job they had sent me out on was to Avis rent a car, and I would get off at like 11 o'clock at night, come home, and that was when Art Bell came on, and so I would listen to it on the way home.
So you'd switch that on, and were you in the desert at that time?
No, we were in Hawaii.
Oh, okay.
But then we went from Hawaii to the Nevada desert. And of course, he was big there because he was a native Nevadan. And so he was on the local talk radio station. And I worked late swing. I worked graveyard for a couple of years. Then I worked late swing shift to where I was getting off at like, midnight, 1 a.m, something like that.
Mhm.
And it'd be on while you were out riding around, driving a route in my van.
So you're driving down these desert roads.
Mm-hmm.
And if any of you guys out there have heard the Coast to Coast, and it's late at night,
Mm-hmm.
and you're fumbling through the dial back then,
Mm-hmm.
or even now, I think that still goes on. Maybe I'm wrong about
it's
that.
still on. It's got a different host. Art Bell retired again.
So you would take and you would turn the dial wherever you're traveling. And once you hit that station, you hear this guy and then another guy say, because the space aliens abducted my stepsister and she has 3 heads. And you hear this, imagine me 20 years ago, and I'm switching the thing and I hear something like that. I'm not going to switch that dial. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to listen. And I was intrigued and fascinated by the fact that, because what he did was he would have a forum, for those that don't know, on radio where he was basically, the format was allow people to bring their conspiracies and their strange occurrences, which were, whatever the case, true to them because of it's true to them or because of some psychosis, whatever the case. And he would have a microphone for them and he'd question them to sort of get into the story even deeper. Meanwhile, the audience, you in a car driving down the Nevada desert, or me here through whatever, the Everglades and whatnot, you're listening to all this and you're like, no, that's not true, dude, you're such a liar, or man, can it be true, and all these things. And it's just such an entertaining thing.
It was entertaining at the time, and he kind of fell into it by accident. I looked him up, by the way. He passed away in 2018, so Art Bell is no longer with us.
Okay.
But Art Bell was many things, and he believed many things, and he questioned a lot of things. But 2 things, well, actually 3 things, you had to give the man. There were just 3 good facts. Number 1, he was a professional. He knew how to be on radio. Number 2, he was an excellent interviewer because he would ask questions in such a way that he could ask you the same thing 11 times and you'd give him a different answer every time. And which dovetailed into my 3rd point, and that is he remained a skeptic. He wanted you to prove it to him.
Yeah.
And if your story was compelling and convincing and you could back it up with witnesses, photographs, audio, video, whatever, documents, anything, you might just, but he had an open mind. You might just sway his mind, but he remained a skeptic. He didn't just jump on the cause of the day. And in fact, it was that quality in him that I liked so much, because he proved so many people to be phonies, frauds, and just flat out liars on that show. He did that so many times that people, that's how he kept his credibility. I mean, because you're absolutely right. If you had a story to tell, he gave you the microphone and you could tell that story. Yeah. And he would start off open mic one night at 10 minutes into the show and get a call 20 minutes into the show and keep that person on the phone for an hour. Carry him through a news break and all of the commercial breaks and everything else. If they had a good story to tell and they were convincing and compelling, he would keep them on.
Now, so this whole thing that he would do this type of show is kind of indicative of a whole sort of, I guess, area of Americana culture-wise that loosely or closely connects with the old B sci-fi monster movies, radio zap 'em, laser gun zap 'em, radio shows from before our time, let's say. And there's this whole thing, and I mentioned also, actual sort of, I guess, doubts that Americans back in history had, and it's a way of protecting yourself from, so people would believe all these. But putting that to the side, going back to the lizard scenario, if you tell somebody there's lizard people out there and stuff, people are gonna, for the most part, if you're so inclined, you might say, well, heck, tell me more. And so, but for the most part, they're gonna say, oh, come on, dude, or not say anything and just go about their way and say, well, this guy's nuts. But I do want to say that in culture, there's all across the world, there's an icon of a lizard, half man, seen throughout the world, namely Egypt, but apart from that, in Indian tribes and whatnot. And they have their mythologies and religions and all these things. And lizards play into that. And we see lizards even in the Bible, let's say, and just across the spectrum. So in Egypt, you have them. Well, there's this whole theme of these creatures and all that. Well, so the reason I wanted to bring this up is just to chat about all of that, but also to bring up that in those early days of me fumbling around the internet and having the disposition of curiosity that I do and the enjoyment of the entertainment, I ran across a guy called David Icke. Have you heard of him?
Yes, I have.
Now, the claims and the amount of following that this guy has garnered, where he does, I guess, DVDs, website stuff, books, he does the
engagements,
speaking engagement rounds across the world,
right,
in basically amphitheaters that you could probably, amphitheaters basically, full of people. And I don't know what it says about the people, about him. I mean, I know what it says about him. And by the way, there could be some truths on the mythological side and all that. But if you've not heard of, for those out there have not heard of David Icke, he's an English gentleman. And I'm just going to give you a synopsis about it, and just throw it at you. So David Icke, he was a soccer player, right? And then he was also a sports broadcaster. But in the 90s, let me read it out to you. In the 90s, while spokesman for the Green Party, he visited a psychic who he said told him he had been placed on Earth for a purpose and would begin to receive messages from the spirit world. Now, this guy that was on TV and all that had his credibility. He went on a show, and it was the Wogan show.
Terry Wogan, okay.
And everybody knew him back in the day and still do, I guess, and he said that he was the son of the Godhead and that the world would soon be devastated by tidal waves and earthquakes. And he repeated that prediction. For the next 11 years, this gentleman wrote books and developed what soon became the Reptilian Agenda. And it's gotten to the point where, well, he's got a massive following. And the whole idea is, have you heard of the Reptilian Agenda?
I've not heard of the book, but I've heard of the theory.
Okay, so what's your understanding? And I'll elaborate in case. But what
about the only thing that I have heard from David Icke is that somehow he believes that somehow the British royal family are a bunch of 7-foot tall reptilian beings in 6 foot tall humanoid suits. That's basically what I've heard.
You're such an amateur reptilian, explorer.
See,
Let me give you volume 1 through 85 so you can really get into it.
well, much like Art Bell, I remain a skeptic.
Do you remember? Well, see, here's the thing. It's so extreme, but do you remember the movie? I don't know if you ever saw the movie They Live.
No.
So the movie They Live was with Roddy Piper, the WWF wrestler from back in the day. And what it is it's a movie it's very 80s, and what it is, it's a movie where this guy, he treks across and enters like LA, let's say, or New York. I forget what it was, but he walks down a hill and there's your big bustling city, and he makes it into an alleyway where some people are fighting fisticuffs, and he ends up seeing like they left a box full of like glasses, and he takes the glasses and he puts them on, and he says, okay, brand new sunglasses, and he starts walking. And as he's walking down the streets of this major American city, he looks up and he sees the billboard saying, obey. We are your masters. And he's like, what? And he takes off the glasses and he sees the glasses with a lady holding like a martini cup or whatever. And he's like, what? And he puts them back on and he sees obey. He's like, what? And he keeps walking. And he looks at like the newsstands with all the magazines and comic books and newspapers. And he looks and he sees like obey, submit. And he takes off the glasses. He sees so the glasses allow for him to see the reality of what it is. And a lot of people that have watched, and I've run this by Ryan Bitters in the past, and he won't have anything to do with it because of the whole insanity. But a lot of movies, these directors don't spend, not all of them, but there's deeper layers of meaning. You have your movie, and then you have your undertow of, and so this is saying something about society and all that, and you could ponder that, but you can see where I'm going with that. He finally meets people. There's humans, but with the glasses, some of these people are like these alien creatures. And they have really weird bugged out eyes and all that. And there's a famous scene where he's pissed already because this is America. I'm not going to have it. You guys are going down for trying to take over our society, because they've actually occupied all levels of society. So he walks into a bank. I don't even know why. And some of the tellers are human and some are not. They have the bugged out stuff. And, he gets a shotgun, which he acquired in a fight somewhere down an alley. And he goes, and he says, I have come to chew bubble gum and kick ass, And he says, I'm all out of bubble gum.
Right.
And they're like, oh, and he starts firing on the aliens. The humans are freaking out because they're like, what the hell? You're killing humans, but they're actually aliens. So there's levels of knowledge in there that's not, they're telling a story and they're telling a sub-story, just like the Matrix is telling a dual story or various levels of story. Sure. And so anyhow, going to the reptilian thing, David Icke has totally capitalized on this thing. Sure. And yes, he believes that the royal family are blood drinkers, and that they're either full reptilian from the from the constellation Draconi, whatever, and they've come here and they're like the overlords, and they look just like you. They don't don a suit. What it is just like the movie They Live, except there's no glasses to see it. They're shapeshifters, and they require blood. And there's all these category of level of things that these people are, and that's why you have your cold-blooded murders and this and that. So yeah, so that's the theme with the reptilian agenda. But David Icke, he's known across the world, and people are totally down with the plan.
Well, Dan Brown is known around the world too, for his story on the Da Vinci Code. And I don't know if anybody has found any secret instructions on the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution or anything like that to find this treasure, supposedly. I mean, you can have a theory on basically anything, but what will convince people that your theory is valid is the preponderance of your evidence. And I just don't see him having a lot of evidence.
Well, you can't hold that against people, because
Sure I can. I mean, I have a theory that goats can fly, but
no, but
I
hold
don't
on.
have a lot of evidence.
No. You can't hold that against people.
Sure.
Because well, let me tell
Okay,
you
go ahead.
what's the story, because they don't even require that much. Their threshold isn't even that high, because if people, okay, so think of this, if people can fill up auditoriums to hear about the lizard people, there's two things: either they're considering it complete entertainment, or whatever percentage are, or they're totally believing the situation.
And either way, he's a good storyteller. He makes a compelling case, and he has attracted their attention, and he's raking it in.
That's true.
He's found his rice bowl because he's found his audience. He didn't have to go through the various publishers. His first few books, I think, were self-published, but it was so far out there, it garnered attention. And because he had a name already and was able to go on Terry Wogan's show. And by the way, let's be real here. It's now Sir Terry Wogan. He is that big in the UK. Because he had that much exposure, that rice bowl got bigger and bigger and bigger. So whether he himself believes it or not, or he's just spinning a tale, you can't deny he's raking it in. So, now, again, if you have some concrete evidence, maybe you'll change my mind. But I just don't see a lot of evidence. I mean, it's a good story. It's a great yarn, and you're absolutely right. There are depictions of more than just lizards, let's just say reptilians, because there are depictions of half snake or serpent, half human. But you can't really go back to Egypt and talk about reptile human hybrids, because they also had wolf human hybrids and jackal human hybrids. There were canines involved as well. There were the Greeks with the minotaurs. Pan was half man, half goat. There are all kinds of different cultures that have had human animal hybrids involved in them. So ancient mythology being what it is and what it is known as today and known for today was just simply a way for people, the culture back then, to explain things they didn't have an explanation for. I don't know where the rain comes from, so it must be the rain god, that type of a thing. And so me personally, I take that for what it is. It was them trying to explain something they couldn't explain with the knowledge and the technology that they had at the time. It's still a far cry for me to, I mean, when you think about a civilization that was advanced enough, to make the, Antikythera device, still believed in some of the mythologies that they believed in, you have to kind of wonder, how do you reconcile one versus the other? These were not a stupid people. If they can come up with something that could track the phases of the moon to include eclipses and attract the path of the earth around the sun and keep track of the seasons, as well as hundreds of other calculations, they weren't stupid. How could they possibly believe that there was Zeus up on Mount Olympus? Well, that was their way of explaining how the world worked. They could track how the world worked, but they still really didn't have any explanation for it. So going back to hieroglyphs or heck, even cave paintings, we have always had storytellers. Humans have, from the time we could put words together, there have been storytellers. And some of those stories live on today as legends, and others kind of transformed into the basis of some religions. So, I mean, who's to say? But to make that claim today, I think we as a people, we as a race, have developed enough sophistication to ask for a bit more evidence. You know, even 30, 40 years ago, it was widely accepted that, have you heard of Erich von Däniken and his series of books, The Chariots of the Gods?
No, it sounds familiar though.
Okay, he basically linked cave paintings and carvings, and even the lines, the Itasca lines up in the Atacama Desert, Natasca line, excuse me, in the Atacama Desert. He linked them to what he called ancient astronauts, basically UFOs, visitors from another planet. The problem with most of his theories were they were completely shot down by other anthropologists and archaeologists. I mean, like, for instance, the Atacama Desert, he claimed that these figures in the soil could only be seen from the air, which was absolutely not true. You walk 10 feet up the side of the hill. Remember, this is a valley. You walk 10 feet up the side of the hill and you can see them. The archaeologists and anthropologists of the area believed these were markings that pointed to the direction of water, because that's one of the driest areas on the planet. And if you pick certain points in these lines and follow them, you will get to sources of water. And so that's their closest theory. But von Däniken said, oh no, these were actually created by these ancient astronauts as signals for directions from the sky. And look at this one here, and he has several photographs, this one in particular, that looks like the layout of a modern airport. If you kind of squint one eye and turn your head sideways, it almost kind of looks like runways. And no less than Carl Sagan questioned him on it and basically said, you're telling me that a civilization that could fly millions of light years from one solar system to here needs a runway? What are they flying, B-52s? What do they need with runways? They don't need an airport like that. Come on, man. You can do better than that. But it turns out if you followed that main line about 2 miles down the road, there was a watering hole. So his theories were kind of debunked. He used a lot of falsehoods and basically kind of got politely laughed aside. But millions of people followed him and believed him. You know. So I'm thinking that David Icke is along the same lines, personally. Just my opinion. You know. Now, if he can come up with some hard evidence, if he can catch one running around Buckingham Palace not wearing the human suit, then, you know, I'm right there with you. But
well, wait a second.
Pretty far-fetched.
You're right there with who?
With Icke. I mean, if he can show me, prove and show me, you know, my family's from Missouri. Show me.
So he does have a lot of following, and he and people. So it's a hard sell. It's a hard sell. But even though he's got people rolling in through the gates to see these spectacles, and he has created because, like, do you remember Tolkien that created the Lord of the Ring books? Yeah. So, and this is another thing that occurs with humans, is that there's mythologies that are created. Tolkien saw that there was a need for mythologies in England, and he created this using all these scattered, old, fables and whatnot, and created this whole extended, and it's a pretend. But he devised it and he created it, and millions of people have enjoyed the books and movies, and Dungeons and Dragons broke out from there and stuff. And there's these people that do these things. The truth or fact, but he never claimed it to be a reality. He's saying this is our fantasy that we're, but someone like David Icke is actually saying something different. He's saying, hey, guess what? This is what's happening. There are lizard people, and they come from space. So they're actually, and they're space travelers, and they have incorporated in society, and they are controlling you. And on the level of a, I guess, allegory would be the thing to call it. No, that wouldn't be an allegory. What would you call, it's using, I guess, what's the one using a
metaphor? Oh,
I guess it's
allegorical. Yeah.
An allegory would work. You can use extraordinary tales to, get across a underlying sort of thing, but he's not saying that. He's dispelling with that dual movie thing that I was mentioning earlier on, and he's going straight for saying, no, this is truth. And again, he's using imagery that's embedded in us, like I mentioned earlier, that has been created in myths throughout history in different civilizations, from Egypt to, and he's brought these themes together in order to push this across, and it seems to be successful for the guy. But it is so far-fetched, even though I enjoy, and I've talked about this with Ryan and in the other podcast a couple of years back and stuff, and I did hype it a little bit and stuff, but there's a far cry from entertainment and actually, you know what I'm saying, and actually saying, this is, I believe that my next door neighbor is a reptile. That's there's two.
Well, but look at the number of people. I mean, just a few years ago, we were vampire crazy.
I still love vampire movies.
Yeah, I mean, Bram Stoker, when he wrote Dracula, it was a work of fiction. However, there are people who believe vampires walk among us. Look at, we were vampire crazy, well, since the first Dracula movie came out. Before that, it was the book. All of the vampire movie, Interview with a Vampire, the Twilight series. I mean, you can just go back through popular culture reference. But there are millions of people around the world that believe there are vampires walking among us now. And the same thing with werewolves.
Listen,
there are millions of people who believe that there are werewolves walking among us now.
Well, wait a second. There's people that actually believe themselves to be
yes, you're
vampires.
Absolutely right.
So it's not only that there's something out there. It's that no, I myself am a vampire, and period.
And witchcraft and the whole thing. I mean, you can go in hundreds of different directions with this, but it still comes back to evidence.
Let me say this bit. So these situations, this is a key point where you have a lot of people believing in something that really, as a consensus, we think of as like insane. But that also says something about, it says something about us as well.
Yeah, well, you're right about that.
And here's what I'm going to push out there. We have a chunk of missing information regardless. We really don't know what the heck is going on. That void is fertile ground for the imagination and for people that want to, I don't want to say con, but it's fertile ground for that possibility. And the reason
Right.
I don't want to say con is because you can categorize something in
Well-
in fun and this and that, but it says something about humanity because there's a vast chasm that we do not know. None of us here in the chat, out there in the world, really know squat, is what I've come to know. And when I mean squat, I don't mean like the knowledge one gains with the things that I'm talking about the big question. We don't know.
No, we don't know.
And because that chasm is there, well, what I had mentioned.
Sure. But you can have it's true that we don't know, but in a lot of ways we know what it's not. You know, there was I'm reminding of oh my God, I can't remember what his name was. He was a speaker. This was back in the 1800s here in the US. And I can't remember what his name was. Anyway, he gave a speech where he was talking about the origin of the planet Earth. And this woman came up to him after the speech and she says, "Well, I'm very sorry, but you're absolutely wrong. The Earth was not created by God. It was not created by a big bang. We are a speck of dust sitting on the back of a turtle." And he said, "Okay, madam, what is that turtle standing on?" She says, "Why, a bigger turtle, of course."
Of course.
And he says, "Okay, ma'am, what is that turtle standing on?" And she says, there's no use in arguing. It's turtles all the way down. She never would explain down to what, but she believed it was turtles all the way down. So people will believe what they want to believe. Now, I think David Icke, not only is he a good storyteller and a compelling storyteller, and yes, he has followers that believe what he is saying.
Turtles,
but I think a good portion of them are there for the entertainment, as well as truly believe in what he's saying. And hey, he's found his audience, he's found his crowd, he's found his rice bowl.
But
nobody is either going to be able to prove him right or wrong in his lifetime.
But okay. But right, exactly, because
and
there's no
he
way.
Wants it that way.
Because there's no way. But let me just hold on. Let's just back up for half. Let's just back up for half a second. Think about the implications. So you just said in the theater, you have X amount that are there for entertainment, and then you have X amount that are there because they believe it, right?
Yeah.
Okay, but now let's think of the implication, please, everyone. And I don't, because I love the crazy Mr. But think of the implication of actually honest to goodness within yourself and your mind and yourself saying, you know what, this is serious stuff and I believe it wholeheartedly all the way. That means you as a human being have to start getting prepared yesterday because stuff is coming down. So it's crazy stuff, man, because I mean, at that point, if you are convinced that lizard people and this and that, I mean, you're walking out to the Walmart really worried because I mean, anybody and everybody could be. So it's a tough one. I think maybe could it be that nobody believes it and it's just entertainment?
I have to think that a certain percentage believe, because stop and think about it. He didn't just write a book. He's written a bunch of books. He's put out the DVDs. He's got the website. He's got the speaking engagements and all that other good stuff.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen for nothing. That doesn't happen out of love. It doesn't happen for free. People are buying the stuff.
Yes.
And, you know, if you're there for the entertainment, I could see a certain percentage of them, and I think they're the minority, I would say probably less than a quarter of one of his speaking engagements, less than a quarter of the people there don't believe this and just want to see what this Fruit Loop has to say now.
Because it is entertaining. I think about it. Hey, darling,
Yeah.
you want to go see a guy that believes in reptiles? Sure, there's nothing on TV. Let's go. I could totally see that, dude.
Yeah. I mean, it's not my cup of tea. I'm thinking, no, I got better things to do with my time, especially at $50 a ticket or however much it costs. But this is a guy who has found his crowd and has found his audience. And like I say, nobody's going to be able to either prove it or disprove it in his lifetime. And he wants it that way, because as long as people are talking about it, even if they're calling him a nutcase, you can gin up enough support amongst your followers to attempt to prove those naysayers wrong. Oh, and by the way, buy my new book.
Mm-hmm.
At $26 per copy.
Yeah.
Or, sign up for my free email newsletter, which is basically ads to buy more stuff. Yeah. I mean, that's my kick about these guys. It's always buy my book, buy my DVD, sign up for my free weekly newsletter. Go to my website.
No, you can tell them, hey, Mr. Icke, listen, man, there's no time. We got to save humanity. Send those books out for free. Come on, let's do this, man.
It's not going to happen. It's all a plug to get you to buy the next thing. Become a premium member on my website, and I'll send you the book I couldn't sell you a minute ago absolutely free. Look, here's my friend. He's a scientist. He knows what's really happening. Buy his book, visit his website, buy his DVD, become a premium member to his website, and he'll give you the book that he couldn't sell you a minute ago absolutely free. But wait, I got another friend. Check him out. He works for the government. He knows the inside story. Buy his book. Any of that sounding familiar?
I'm gonna throw a curveball that'll lead us out into the next bit. Unless you want to continue down this line.
Oh, well, we're good. I'm ready to follow wherever you go, my friend.
So back in the day, now that you're talking about, and we'll sell you this book back in the day on TV, remember the infomercials?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how many of you guys out there, because there's an infomercial for each and every one of you that touches you right in the sweet spot that makes you say, I've got to pick up that phone and get me some of that. I mean, I don't care what it was, if it was, and some stuff like the Led Zeppelin, remember the full catalog of Led Zeppelin, and they play the songs in the live show, remember?
Oh, yeah.
And then
the
they
Beatles
say,
anthology and all that other stuff. Buy now. Sessions presents.
I got hooked on, I'm going to tell you, I got hooked by 2 infomercials, and I'm going to come clean on that right now. Now, before I say the 2, did you get hooked on any infomercial and purchase?
1.
Okay, wait, let's, and I don't know what they're useful. Hold on. So I got hit for 2.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a guy from Miami. Mm-hmm. You're a guy from Oregon, and you got hit for 1. Now, that's not a good sort of like, you can't really do any math with that, really. But if humans are similar, if you multiply that throughout the country, the amount of people that bought those, here's the onion peeler / back waxer and all that, it's good business. But
okay, now if you're talking about things like that, the
right?
gizmos and gadgets as seen on TV,
it could be any of it.
We have bought 3, and I've gotten 1 as a gift. But the 3 that we bought actually do work, and we like them.
No, but that's not the point. I love it. Because I'm sorry. Back in the day, you're sitting on the couch watching TV. You're not going anywhere. They show you this like radio / I don't know, nail clipper. Get the nail clipper radio now. You're gonna buy it because what the heck? So I totally get it, but it's funny because you're all across the country. It can be Miami, it could be New York, it could be wherever the hell. People, they're gonna buy it, dude. Because why would you not want a radio nail clipper? What was your item? What was your item?
Okay, one of them was the Popeil rotisserie.
Oh, okay, yeah.
The rotisserie, and it works. It works excellent. It's great. The other one was, I don't even remember where I saw it, but it was a meatloaf pan that had the little insert. When the meatloaf is done cooking, you just lift it right on out and set it down.
It.
And it works like a champ. We still use it. We've had that sucker for about 8 years.
Yeah, you pick up the phone, ma'am. I need one of them sent right away. It's 12 o'clock at night on a Sunday. Just take the order, ma'am.
Actually, the Walmart down in Reno had a section of as seen on TV stuff, and we bought it there.
Yeah. Yeah,
that's up here in a local shopping center. We have the as seen on TV store. There's a store here that specializes. That's all they've got is the as seen on TV stuff. So you can get the great contour pillow, and you can get the back whacker and the salad shooter and the salad picker upper and all the other good stuff.
I love it.
All in one store.
So I'll tell you mine. I got two. Number one, I saw this gadget and I just had to buy it. Years and years ago, maybe 20 some odd years ago, roughly about, or more probably, but just about. And what it was this little bag, and in it was a little battery pack.
Mm-hmm.
Or I guess it had to connect to the wall, but a battery. And then they had these little pads that you'd peel, and it came with a little bottle of like this ointment, and you'd put it on your belly, and you'd connect them, and you'd turn it on, and it would compress your muscles so that so that you could do exercise without having to do exercise. And I bought that thing, and it got there. And I was like, all right, I'm gonna get in shape and double the time, because that way I can do it when I'm watching TV. This is stuff from back in the day. And I did it. I put the little wax, the little cream, and I put each little electrode or whatever you want to call it with little wires connected, and then you click the little thing, and it was like zzz, 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 and it squeezes your muscles. You're not. Yeah, I mean, I guess it helps, but it didn't do jack squat. So I bought that. I had to buy it. I needed that, so that was that.
Well, the other one we got one of the George Foreman grills, which makes excellent sandwiches. That sucker makes good sandwiches.
Yeah, it's good.
That's all there is to it. And I got years ago, and I'm talking, I was 10, 11 years old. I got a Popeil Pocket Fisherman for my birthday. And it was okay. I mean, I didn't really much like it. And I fished with it 3 times, and that was about it. A little bitty rod. You didn't have any control over anything. So it was just like, worthless.
I bought the second one that I bought, and I got the George Foreman clone from like a Walmart or something. I forget exactly the details, but I had one. And it was good. But the second one, I don't know if you guys remember back in the day that there was a guy that was buy our course cassettes in this plastic box with different, tape 1, 2, 3 through whatever, and play these and learn how to have the perfect memory to recall and never forget anything at all. And dude, I saw that commercial like 3 or 4 times, and I was hooked. I was like, I've got to get this. I've got to get this. I want that memory. I want to remember everything. And I bought it, dude. And I did I did what they said. And it does work, but boy, you have to work hard at it. But yes, you can train your mind to remember just about everything. So I bought that as well.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if you're talking about now, see, those are the only things that I think we ever got from infomercials. But if you're talking about like, now we're going back before the infomercials,
okay,
to like when you would watch shows on UHF television.
Yeah.
They always had the low budget commercials, and you had like KTEL records that sold compilations of singles all on one long playing album. You know, you had K-Tel Records and you had Sessions was the other record company. And you would have compilation albums that was totally 70s. Leo Sayer, When I Need You. Pablo Cruz, Time to Find a Place. But anyway, they just went on and on. The advertisements would drive you up a ding-dong tree. But they basically got the rights to all of this music, and they would put... So you'd have one song by one group, one song by another group, another song by another group. If you were really low budget, you went into the bargain bin and you got, and I don't remember what record label it was, they had their own bands cover the music. They didn't even have the original group.
That's hilarious, dude.
So it was one step up from the elevator music that you heard.
That's hilarious as heck, dude.
I mean, it was, oh my God. It was,
because I don't care who you are, dude. If you have the choice between the actual Beatles singing the song and then you know the cover band, I mean, it's cool too, because there are cover bands that I've purchased. I forget the guy's name, but he did like a whole record of the Beatles. So there are cool stuff, but yeah, I could think of that one step up of elevator music. That ain't cutting it, dude. Or is it? Did it cut it?
No, it didn't. You know, it was just close enough to cheese you off, just close enough to where you knew you weren't getting the real deal. Right. But they tried to get it to sound as close as they could. So maybe a vocalist would be real similar to Paul McCartney, but just different enough that you knew that ain't no Paul McCartney, man. You know?
That's hilarious, dude.
But yeah, it was some strange stuff back in the day. And we're talking about the late 60s and early 70s. But they were, you know, this is not sold in stores. Call now. And you had to call to order the album. It was like $3.99 or $4.99 or something like that. And then they started selling the albums in like Payless Drugstore and Walgreens and stuff like that. All of the high-end music shops, because, you know, everybody picks up a record album when they go to get aspirin at the drugstore, right? Yeah. So
I kind of dig the Walmart. Well, I don't have to say it, but the Walmart experience is such a great. If you want record, I mean, they don't have everything, but like they still have CDs and DVDs, and there's a whole aisle you could browse and stuff. I mean, it's really awesome. I don't know why I brought up Walmart, but whatever.
And it's also entertaining when you're looking at a 6-foot-tall dude wearing Daisy Dukes and a wife beater, you know. So you just watch people. If you like to people watch, I mean, you know, you don't even have to go in the store. Just stand out and watch what walks in and out. Just sit in a car, you know.
I mean, it's Disney World, man.
It is.
You know,
it's very much Disney World. But you know, only this podcast could take a conversation that started with lizard people and work it around to Walmart, which when you stop and think about it, isn't that much of a leap.
No, it's not. Hey,
so
look,
I'm gonna have to rethink my skepticism now.
I do want to take this moment here before we continue to mention that we are sponsored by Harneal Media. That's Harneal Media at harnealmedia.com. And what they do is they provide web service, websites, and if you just want a web store to get your gig rolling, they have the best prices on the internet, guaranteed. And you can check that out at harnealmedia.com. We also have a website,
Trampled Underfoot Podcast.com, sponsored by the aforementioned Harneal Media. Steve Nealon does a good job for us, and we appreciate the heck out of him. Head on over to the Trampled Underfoot Podcast.com website. Click that Wayback Machine button up there at the top, right in the middle. You can't really miss it. It's right in the center there. And you can go back and check out our past episodes all the way back to episode 1, when Eloy and I had no gray hair and all this was green fields around us.
We also have a Facebook page called Trampled Under. I thought that breathing was a pause for me to jump in. So if I overstepped you, sorry. But
No,
now,
it's okay.
now I'm driving down the road here.
Motor on, my friend. Motor on.
We also have a Facebook page, and that's Trampled Underfoot Podcast, the Facebook page. And we usually post things that we talk about, whether it's pictures, links to articles, or YouTube videos about what we're talking about, to add a little extra to the theme and, enjoy that. So you might want to go over and click a like on that page and leave us a comment or question, or if you have any suggestions on topics, we sure appreciate those. You could freely leave them there. They're totally welcomed.
That's right. Trampled Underfoot Podcast on Facebook. And don't forget us over here on the mighty YouTube, Trampled Underfoot Podcast. Look for us here on the tubes. We broadcast, we just record. Yeah, I'll edit that out. We record these episodes at 9:30 p.m. Eastern, 6:30 p.m. Pacific on Tuesday nights here on our YouTube channel in front of a semi-live chat room audience. Yeah, some of them are semi-live. Okay, so that's Trampled Underfoot Podcast on YouTube.
All right. So you had a topic or theme you wanted to run by us. What do you got?
Well, I've got two of them. Do you want to be serious or lighthearted?
Whatever your impulse is, I'd go with whatever. I'm open to whatever.
Okay, because both of them I think could be hour-long shows on their own. So I tell you what we can do. We'll just go ahead and go with the more lighthearted one, and we can talk about music.
Okay, cool.
Since we were already talking about records and K-Tel and sessions and all the rest of them. We talk about music from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and occasionally delve into the 90s.
Yes.
But I was trying to think, this has been a few weeks back now. I was trying to think if there was a group that epitomizes the 60s, 70s, or 80s, and I couldn't come up with one. Because even though we're just talking about simple decades,
there's a lot going on.
Excuse me. Yes, those decades are different within the decade. I mean, look at the 60s. The 60s started out with, the Beatles coming over, the English invasion, and, Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons and the surfer music with the Beach Boys and Jan and Dean and stuff like that, which was a completely different animal from how the 60s ended with Creedence Clearwater Revival and Black Sabbath, etc., just on down the line there. So you have different eras within the decade. And the same holds true with the 70s. It started off with the advancement of progressive rock, Pink Floyd and King Crimson and Emerson, Lake and Palmer. Then it ended in the disco era. So there isn't really one group that I can think of that would encapsulate this is 60s or this is 70s or this is 80s. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's an impossible thing to attempt because of what you explained. Plus, there's folk rock,
right?
The psychedelics. It's just there's so much going on and overlap, and then resurfacing of something. And then intermingling of those different genres within one album, and it just really becomes complicated. Yeah.
Exactly. So my question to you would be, is there a group that you can think of? If you just took those for you, let's look at 70s and 80s because you were more of an 80s kid.
I have spent a lot of time with the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. So I'm open to all those. My main one is the 60s. I mean, I have been a student of the 60s. Maybe don't know everybody, but I've been a student. Yeah.
Okay, perfect then. Can you think of a group that would epitomize, if you were trying to explain early 60s rock, let's forget about the center and let's just say 1960 to 65. Can you think of a band that would, if you were trying to explain early 60s rock to somebody, what band would you say, go get an album and listen to these guys?
Well, it's I tend to lean towards the Beatles anyhow. And
Mhm.
Please Please Me, that was their first, at least American album. I don't know what that was in England, but I would have to go for Please Please Me because they were the ones that allowed or gave the idea to all these other rockers to start writing. But you couldn't really, you couldn't really just pin it down to them. But if I had to, that's kind of like the biggest deal in town back then at that
with
point.
with me, and this is kind of a cop out on my part, because with me I couldn't narrow it down to one, because the minute I say the Beatles, the Beach Boys are in the back over here going, no, what about us? Can I can't picture the early 60s without Surfing Safari, Help Me Rhonda, When I Grow Up to Be a Man, that kind of thing.
You're totally right. And they were both chasing their tails to a certain degree, at least on paper. The Beach Boys were what you call marketed as like a counter to the Beatles as well. Even
Right.
though, but the Beatles, everybody wanted to copy the Beatles, and they ended
they
up
did.
they ended up creating the mess, a good mess that began all these other. It's just
Right.
once they started. Yes, the Beatles is a very
Yeah.
Americana thing, but remember the influence that the Beatles had. I'm sorry, the Beach Boys is very Americana, but remember the influence that the Beatles had that swept America and the world.
Exactly. And that reason right there is why I just finally nailed it down. I would agree with you. It had to be the Beatles, because it was more than just the music. It was the way we dressed. It was the way we behaved. It was the hairstyles. Longer hair started to become more acceptable for men. Whether you believe that's good, bad, or indifferent, it is so. The way we dressed, they called them Beatle boots for crying out loud.
Yeah.
They didn't call them that before. And they were easily the most copied band ever, because that sound was different. I mean, people who had never picked up a guitar before in their lives were all of a sudden, they had a Rickenbacker 12 string. I mean, Roger McGuinn, look at the Byrds. Paul Revere and the Raiders started out as a Beatles knockoff band. The Beau Brummels. I mean,
the Zombies.
The number of Beatles knockoff bands that came out, and that just pushed the music that much forward, that much further forward. Holy cow!
Yeah. Totally. Look. It's an easy one to say because the Beatles, I mean, even that first album, which was, I guess you could call, I don't want to say Motown, but they were picking up on American sounds, and they were playing sort of like a current day American. I mean, they had Twist and Shout going on, which was an American classic already.
Roll Over Beethoven.
In the next few albums, in the third album, I believe it was, but that's all part of that era of the Beatles. And they started writing their own music, which changed a lot of people. It changed the Byrds, it changed the Stones, it changed everybody. Everybody. So there's no way around it. I mean, the Beatles.
Okay. Now let's look at the late 60s, the late 1960s. Is there one group who you would say, from say 65 to 70, 69?
I'm gonna say the Beatles. I'm gonna say the Beatles. You can't, dude. Sergeant Pepper. That was 67. What year did you say?
Oh, from about 65 to 69. Let's split up the last half. I'm almost tempted to include 1970, but I got to save 1970 for the 70s.
Okay, so that's a tough one, man, because the Beatles owned the 60s, in my opinion. Yes, there was a truckload of awesomeness going on, but look, Jimi Hendrix, you can't say that he embodied. You could say that, but you can't. I don't know about accessible to all. because it was heavy duty stuff. Um, I wouldn't show them. I would show these aliens, these reptilians coming down to ask us about the music. I'd show them the Beatles catalog. I swear to
Yeah.
you. Please don't
Okay.
eat me. Here's the Beatles.
Okay. I'm gonna I'm gonna kind of put you on your head a little bit here and say the Doors,
That's a good one. That's a
because they took a lot of the Beatles blazed a lot of trails for a lot of people.
yeah.
But then Jim Morrison and the Doors came along and they took that trail off on another tangent and went right out of this world with it.
The,
I
the, the
mean,
yeah, yeah. The Doors are very important because of that tangent you're going to talk
and
about.
it was getting into, and it got into, and it reveled in, and it frolicked in that psychedelic era and kind of helped to usher it in. There were other bands doing it as well, and the Doors were not the first, but they were the most commercially successful in the US anyway, and got a lot of airplay. I mean, when you have songs, when I'm a kid, when you have Light My Fire, People Are Strange, Riders on the Storm, and LA Woman, Roadhouse Blues, all playing on the radio during that late era, it kind of started to make the Beatles look a little old and dated. And that was kind of mom and dad's music. Not really, but this was new, different, and exciting, and it had that psychedelic, youthful vibe to it, to me anyway.
I get it. I see what you're saying, but because for me, all these bands came to me as I explored them after the fact, and I had my pickings of all these bands. So I had the luck in a way, but disadvantage in a way. See, look, as you get them the information, as you're growing up and you're getting it as it's coming out and stuff, so you're seeing it as it progresses. I got all the Beach Boys stuff, Pet Sounds, all of it, because I wanted it, and read the books, biographies to accompany the albums. And the era, I was all crunched into whatever the heck I wanted because I had the advantage of gathering it from the past, whereas you were experiencing it. So you have insights that I could not have, like that you just said, and it makes total sense. You're muted.
Whoops, I thought I had unmuted myself. Then you add the double whammy of growing up in the San Francisco Bay Area, where music was happening in all directions. And a lot of it was coming out of San Francisco and the Bay Area. I mean, Creedence Clearwater is a good example. A lot of people think that these were a bunch of swamp kids from Louisiana or Mississippi and down south, because that's the kind of vibe that they had. Mm-hmm. They were from El Cerrito. They were from the Bay Area of California. Some people think they were from Berkeley. Actually, they were from El Cerrito, which is just north of the Oakland-Berkeley area. So it was going on there and experiencing it as it came out, and I'm listening to it on the radio as it's coming out. I still think, to me, the Doors just kind of epitomized the sound of the late 60s. You can't place them in any other era.
You're like, in my opinion, dead on with that, and it was such a good pick. And honestly, on a personal note, the Doors, they have this dark, shadowy turn into a corridor, circus-like. Mm-hmm. There's all these themes that they're kind of like going back to the whole theme of double entendre, like double layered mm-hmm. Cake of knowledge. They had levels that were going into the subconscious in a musical sense, mm-hmm. and that's just a fascinating thing to explore. And unlike, I'm gonna piss off some people here, but unlike Pink Floyd, where they are very spacey and non-committal in a certain way, the Doors were spacey, but the rawness of Jim Morrison using the attitude of a blues man. And what men have is that they tell it to you raw in your face. That
Right.
mix of the two is a very special mix that they had that, and they didn't even have a bass player in their band, which is a no-no,
Right.
but they did it.
And then you add in also the advances in, because this was still I wouldn't say the infancy, but the toddlership of stereo, where you had engineers experimenting with panning, putting a drum off to one side and the organ over off to another side, and your guitar and your vocalist right in the center. And you also had them blending and playing with sounds where you would have a guitar during a solo moving from your left speaker over to your right speaker. And that just fed in and even fueled more of that psychedelic feel to the whole thing. And there were albums that were engineered 100% around that whole psychedelic feel. They were meant to be experienced while you were tripping on something. And they played with the balance, sometimes slowly, sometimes real quickly. And I mean, the wah-wah pedals and the heavy reverb and the phasers and things like that were starting to work into the mix in there. It was 100% done for that psychedelic flavor.
You could tell when a band or an editing, mixing, you could tell when they're aware of that, as opposed to bands that are using from that era, sort of like an outdated of that era mixing style, which is cool too. In retrospect, it's all cool. But that advance where they started tweaking that panning and doing all that really skyrocketed, especially for someone that likes to listen to music with headphones on. Boy, that's a trip, and that's fun.
Well, it drove the sales of stereo equipment because now it wasn't good enough to have a little mono record player. You had to have a stereo. And the major selling point was 6 feet of separation between the speakers. You have to have 6 feet of separation between the speakers. Otherwise, it doesn't work. Yeah. And it boosted the sales of headphones, and music purists now won't even listen to music without headphones. And I'm one of those people. I got a decent stereo that I use for my computer in the other room. I listen to music under headphones because it sounds best. You get the whole thing, the real deal.
I mean, you really get the personalized little note that Eric Clapton hits. You know, Layla and other assorted love songs, how the organ and piano is occurring on one ear. It's more when you have the earphones, you're hearing the little note, and if you volume it at the right, it doesn't have to be too loud, but at the right space, you could hear all of it playing, and it's just one of the great, thank goodness we're alive.
And you hear the layering that the engineer meant for you to hear. You'll hear the main riff, and then a little bit of an acoustic will come in over here on the left side of the mix. You're like, oh, where'd that come from?
Yeah.
You know, you may not have noticed it while you were listening to it on your car speakers while you were driving to work, but you pick it up. You may not have noticed it, but now that you know that it's there, you would miss it.
Yeah.
You know? So, okay, now let's jump ahead a decade and go for early 70s. Who would you say from 70 to 75 epitomized the 70s?
From 70 to 75. 75?
Yeah. We'll go for the middle. I mean, we could break it up into thirds. We could break it up into 2-year segments, but we've already been on for an hour and 13 minutes and ain't nobody got time for that.
Well, I have to think about that, epitomizing the 70s. And by the way, before we go there, I just want to say that going mono back before that we were just talking about, it is surprising some of those mono mixes like Nat King Cole, how clear and how they took advantage of the studio placement of all the musicians to allow for the best recording of a mono recording. If you ever listen to the Nat King Cole's, they're just beautiful. You wouldn't miss the stereo. You would not miss the stereo with the quality that they had. Going to the 70s, boy, that's going to be a tough one for me. What do you think?
The Who.
Oh,
The Who. Starting with, now I know they did albums before that. They did Tommy and they played at Woodstock and everything. But Who's Next? Quadrophenia, I think, and Who Are You, I think epitomized the early 70s. I mean, you only have to listen to that scream. You only have to listen to Roger Daltrey's scream twice in We Won't Be Fooled Again. That right there is rock and roll, and that is 70s. That tune right there epitomizes the 70s. Early 70s.
See, in the 60s, we had T-Rex, the beginnings of, but he didn't come into his own, Mark Bolan, until I think the album came out in 1970 proper. I could be wrong. It could be 69. I think it was called Monolith, the album. And to me, that whole album and the rock, it was the beginning of glam.
Yeah.
It was a departure from a lot of people were doing the harder rock and stuff, but he was going into this sort of glam thing. But that album by T-Rex, which Get It On,
right, Bang a Gong,
that and other songs on that album were very special. The whole album is listenable, and because of him, people like they've said it, Ziggy Stardust was a development from that.
Yep.
Even Elton John mentions him as, a person that he looked at and said, oh, you can be glam, I'm going to be even more glam and stuff. Even though maybe that's not the best, but I would pick that. I don't know if it encompasses the 70s, the early 70s well enough.
Now, I picked The Who, and mainly because of that song, We Won't Be Fooled Again.
I like The Who.
And that scream. But my second pick, and I bounced back and forth on this for days. My second pick was Led Zeppelin.
You know what? That is such an obvious one that I would, yeah.
And the only reason I picked The Who to epitomize the early 70s was that scream.
I changed my thing, although I love the Mark Bolan T-Rex. I would go, the obvious one for me is Led Zeppelin 2, and that would represent to me the early part of the 70s. Led Zeppelin 2 with Ramble On and Moby Dick and all the other ones. Yeah, that's my favorite of the Led Zeppelin albums.
Okay.
Yeah, so I have to change although the Mark Bolan was the one I was choosing, but you reminded me that there's no way to go around that.
So what I was doing was I was also giving myself an out, because I think as far as the late 70s are concerned, so we're looking at 75 through 79, I think it's a toss-up between Zeppelin and Pink Floyd, because you had the breakup of Led Zeppelin when John Bonham died, and their last album came out.
I think that happened in the 80s, early 80s, 81.
Bonham? I thought he died in the late 70s.
I think their
last. I'm going to have to rethink of that then.
Or maybe it was their album of leftovers, which was called Presence, I think it was called.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I'm not sure. I think that he had passed away in the 81
1980.
Yeah. Okay.
1980. Yes, you're right. But still, they kept going with Coda came out in the 1980s.
Okay, so that's the one.
Right. But In Through the Outdoor, which a lot of people didn't like, came out in 78, but I loved it. I loved that album.
It's got some good songs. It's got Dire Maker.
Yeah, I mean, Fool in the Rain.
How do they? Is it Dire? I always called it Dire Maker.
So did I.
They spelled it weird, so I'm like, I don't know. Is it Dire or Deer? Whatever.
Either one. But I mean, you can't deny that the film and the accompanying soundtrack album, Song Remains the Same. I mean, come on. That's huge to me. But also, Pink Floyd was coming off of, they made The Wall, which, although it was close, it wasn't the commercial success of Dark Side of the Moon, but it cemented them as the legends, you know. So between the movie and the film, or excuse me, and the album, I think Floyd along with Led Zeppelin, both, I think, epitomized the late 70s. Now, the mid 70s, I've seen a couple of people over there talking in the chat, mentioning Queen. Queen, I would place mid 70s, because you go 70. Let's see.
You're so right. There's so many good ones. I forgot Queen, but I wouldn't see. I'd go with Led Zeppelin. To me, Led Zeppelin. I mean, because you could also go for Black Sabbath, but does it encompass the whole spectrum? I don't think it. I think.
Well,
Led Zeppelin for the whole Beatles for the 60s, Led Zeppelin for the 70s.
Okay.
And in my opinion, if you break up the 80s, am I going to?
No. All I was going to say was, to me, Queen. All the people are suggesting Queen. Queen, to me, owns the middle of the 70s, from about 74, when A Night at the Opera came out, and Bohemian Rhapsody. Now, you can argue you can go back further before that, but I would say 99% of people who know Queen or Queen's music were introduced to them from Bohemian Rhapsody. I know I was. I had never heard of them before, but I ding-dong sure heard about them a lot after. So I think from about 74 to about 78, Queen owned the 70s. Because, you know, and it was 100% Freddie Mercury. Brian May is good, but Freddie Mercury is that much better.
I mean, but that's the whole thing. All of them together is what creates the magic, because it's the same with like the Beach Boys. You could argue that Brian Wilson is like a bad to the bone writer, and he is.
Yeah,
but
that can't be denied.
But when him and the Beach Boys are together, they create magic, because they can it hits the right spot. And when it's him alone, he's got some great albums, which I'm a Brian Wilson fan. Like, just so I'll buy his solo albums, and have.
Okay, so you wanted to go to the early 80s. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to jump back in, but I had to address the Queen elephant in the room.
No, if I could like slice the 80s into two quadrants, I would give the latter half of the 80s to Guns N' Roses for the win by far. And the earlier slice of the 80s, very difficult to say, because you can say Van Halen, you could say the glam rock people like Whitesnake. I need a white snack.
We're calling back to the reptilians, huh? Okay, yeah.
I need a human snack. White Snake, but I would have to go with Metallica for the early part of, and I know, and by the way, you could argue Bon Jovi for the
early 80s.
Yeah, or actually they started like, wasn't it like 84? I think mid 80s with Slippery When Wet. I don't know, whatever. You could argue for Bon Jovi. You could argue for Def Leppard. You could argue for so many people. I don't feel comfortable arguing for Metallica for the first half, but it's what I was listening to like every day.
Yeah.
So Guns N' Roses for the latter half, and I'm just going to go ahead and say Metallica for the first. AC/DC. I mean, for AC/DC in the 70s, for goodness sakes.
I was going to give the early 80s to AC/DC and the late 80s to Metallica. Those were my picks.
See, Guns N' Roses can't be left out, even though they were short. They burned their fuse on both ends. They were so powerful, dude. I mean, I know that it's not your cup of tea necessarily, but boy, they were what in the 80s.
Well, Appetite for Destruction came out in 87. So yeah. But I still think Metallica was bigger by then. I don't know though. I can't really say that. Now Metallica, yeah. Because then Use Your Illusion 1 and 2 came out, but that was 1990.
Yeah, but we're talking Appetite, which was their monstrous.
Yeah,
you couldn't switch on the radio, what was going on at the time, and not hear Guns N' Roses, and it was a big deal, dude. Just for my generation, it was a big deal. It's not like I was sitting there listening to it every day. I was listening to Metallica. But to be honest with you, it represents. They do.
And I have to think about it in both directions, because when I turned on the radio, now we've got to preface this by saying from 88 to 92, we were living in Germany. So we only had one English language radio station over there, which was the Armed Forces Network.
Okay.
But we hopped in the car to go home or go to work. We heard Sweet Child of Mine just as often as we heard Enter Sandman.
Yeah, but that's
so
after
it's
the fact.
Hard to
but Metallica did not. Let's see. Metallica came out with "And Justice for All." I believe in either 87 or 88, and it was the first time in their career that they started doing music videos, getting people's attention, because before that it was all audio, which Metallica fans appreciated, and seeing them on screen, we wanted to keep that away from. We wanted to keep it like non-video, because it's the heavy metal thing, and obviously that train has left the station. Like now I wouldn't care, obviously, but back then that was the attitude. So they exploded at the Black Album era.
Right.
But before that, it was kind of, I don't want to say underground, because they were filling up arenas. Right. But it wasn't the same. Guns N' Roses.
Okay. But remember the category. The category was not to pick the best band, in our opinion, but a band, if we were explaining the late 80s music to somebody who had never heard it.
Aerosmith.
Who would you pick and say, if you want to hear what the late 80s sounded like, listen to any album by these guys? That's what the late 80s sounded like.
Oh.
So I don't think you could go wrong with either Guns N' Roses or Metallica, because I think they both do it.
I can't believe I'm sorry. I usually try. Billy Burt says Genesis. I get, I can't dance, I can't sing. I get, in the 80s they were doing all that pop stuff. I bought Genesis stuff, but I can't do that. Billy. You mentioned them.
Yeah, well, but there are so many choices, because it also depends on your style of music. A lot of people aren't into hard rock or metal, So they would say, for instance, for the late 60s, they would say Crosby, Stills, and Nash, because they're just not into the heavier stuff, or for the early 60s, Bob Dylan's first couple albums. It just depends on, now we're down to personal preference. My whole point was, if somebody didn't know, I wasn't into rock and roll in the early 80s. Who should I listen to? I don't think you could go wrong by, either Van Halen or Guns N' Roses or Metallica, because they do epitomize that era. You could also say Twisted Sister or what was the other one? Rat. Oh, no, not Rat. Oh hell, I can't think of the name of the group now. Never mind. It's not important. Skid Row. That's the one I was trying to think of.
See, but that, because they come into the picture because you had the explosion start with, honestly, with Van Halen, but
Right.
as the decade progressed, we were getting, it was kind of like the same thing with the 60s. So they saw that Eddie Van Halen had the hair and the glammed out stuff, and David Lee Roth, and everybody started going at it. And then you had all the bands, Rat, you had Winger later on, you had Skid Row, Def Leppard, as I've mentioned before. Everybody, and sure, Twisted Sister was doing it. I get it, but it was from I'd have to go with Van Halen, dude.
But I never associated Van Halen with glam rock because I don't think they were.
No,
they never teased up the hair. David Lee Roth might have, but I don't think so.
No, he did.
But he didn't. But it wasn't like Cinderella or any of the other glam.
No.
Bands,
it wasn't like.
So I never associated them with glam. Is what I'm getting at. Uh-oh. Did I freeze or did you? No. Uh-oh. Looks like he froze up. Uh-oh. He's going to have to come back in.
I'm back.
You didn't pay your bill, did you?
No. No, it just crapped out on me. What was the last part that you heard before I crapped out?
You know what? I don't know. I'll fix it in the edit. I was saying, we were talking about whether Van Halen was glam or not. I just never associated him with being glam rock.
Yeah.
And
I had such a good punchline, and then it froze out on me.
Yeah.
I had such a great punchline because I was saying, I guess Van Halen isn't. See, it's not going to. I'm not going to even repeat it. Well, I'll repeat it just for the sake. You could cut it out in the edit. I would just say that they weren't that extreme glam, like saying, "Hey, I'm on androgynous, aren't I?" Like they weren't that extreme. As the latter bands afterwards. And by the way, Extreme came at the end as well. So it's just, the 80s was awesome, dude. And the 80s was freaking awesome. Looking back on it now, it was a badass music decade. A little vain, less introspection, honestly.
A little.
True.
And
dude.
AC/DC was a little loud.
Yeah. I mean, could you imagine what they had to wear to go out on stage and like all the stuff that they're and we got to tease our hair. Hey, Richie Valentino, guitarist. Yeah, what is it? Trixie Trix, the singer. You got to tease your hair a little bit more. That ain't happening. Oh, okay. Could you imagine the conversations these guys would have? It has nothing to do with music. They were all doing it was ridiculous. But regardless, it was a show. It was a show.
Oh, it was nothing but a show, and it was fun. And well, good grief, it's been an hour and a half. We might want to think about landing the plane. But just to bring it back and bring it all around and all tie it in, I think we should change the title of this podcast from Rendezvous with the Lizard People. I think we should go back to the Doors and use Jim Morrison. I'm the Lizard King. I can do anything.
Hey, man. I'm down with any of that.
What say you out in the almost live audience?
Well, he also used symbology and those things in his sort of subconscious, because they are these iconic Native American, and they use these, these are traditions, these are religious, these are stories, folklore, and I guess tying the whole thing together works with the Doors. I mean, I don't see any other way around
Not to
it.
mention, he was just off of his nut.
I mean,
But then again, who, what artist isn't,
there's a lot of sane artists.
Yeah, and I've never heard of them.
The boring ones.
But you don't come up with a song like "Not to Touch the Earth" after a cup of coffee, okay? Let's be honest,
Yeah, that's a great song, by the way.
It is.
It's great because it's so weird.
Nothing left to do but run, run, run.
House upon the hill, moon is sitting still. Nothing left to do but run, run, run. Let's run.
Let's run.
He's talking about, at one point, the Kennedy assassination in that song.
He talks about all kinds of stuff in all of the music, man. You wonder where the heck he gets it, where the heck it came from, and where the heck he was trying to go.
He read a lot of philosophy, and he was on that journey, and that came out in his music. That's why it's just good stuff. Hey, good show today, dude. It went by pretty darn fast, and we kept rocking. So
yeah, an hour and 36 minutes, and it's my edit. That's okay. We made enough mistakes that I can trim out. I can bring it down to something that somebody would actually want to listen to. Well, that's what we do.
I mean, dude. Of course, dude. If people listen to, a guy talking about lizard people, and you got to buy your lizard invisible goggles, come on. Yeah. That means there's something for everyone,
Yeah, exactly. That's what I mean. Only we would dare to do it.
Anyways, we're gonna let you guys go. I hope you enjoyed it. Let us know if you enjoyed the show. What'd you think of it? We need some feedback. We'd like some feedback. Yeah. And boy, see, it keeps going. Jim Dockrell said Santana, and that's totally true.
Yeah, there are a million, but Santana you could place in a couple of generations. You could place, I mean, his music is literally the definition of timeless, because it sounded excellent then and it sounds excellent today. And it's literally timeless. You could not, if you didn't know when a Santana song came out, you wouldn't know what decade it came from, because Evil Ways and Black Magic Woman are just as relevant today and sound just as good today. They haven't dated. They haven't aged. The only thing that's aged is us.
So once again, guys, check us out every Tuesday here on the YouTube channel. That's Trampled Underfoot Podcast on YouTube at 9:30 Eastern Time and 6:30 Pacific Time. We also have a website, and that's trampledunderfootpodcast.com. You can catch our past episodes over there by pressing the Wayback Machine button, and leave us some feedback over on our Facebook page under the same name. And we are also sponsored by
Harneil Media. Steve Nealon over to Harneil Media does an excellent job for us, and he can do an excellent job for you too. Check him out at harneilmedia.com. That's HARNEAL media.com.
All right. So that was good. We're good to go.
We're good to go.
All right. So see you guys.
Take care.